Mhm. To read differently this time, let me no glasses. All right, Bismillah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد في الأولين وصل عليه في الآخرين وصل عليه يا ربنا في الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد طب القلوب ودوائها وعافية الأبدان وشفائها ونور الأبصار وضيائها وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم نور قلوبنا بمعرفتك. اللهم نور قلوبنا بمعرفتك. اللهم نور قلوبنا بمعرفتك وقربنا إلى كل ما يقربنا إليك يا أرحم الراحمين. Bismillah. All right, so we left off on this section. We're talking about solitude. So the author, rahimahullah ta'ala wa nafa'ana Allahu iyyahu bi'ulumihi wa ulumi mashayikhina fi darain ameen, is talking about the benefits of isolation, essentially, or solitude. And this idea that there are things that one benefits when they're alone with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we talked about how many people think about that as kind of like they're alone, they're away from the people, and so they're not harmed by the people. But one of the main things that they say about that actually is that when the person isolates himself for the worship of Allah, actually what they're doing is they're saving the people from their harm, not the other way around. And of course, this would be the way to think about things, right? The way to think about things in our spiritual development, and our personal spiritual development, is to think about them from my own personal responsibility. So if someone decided to isolate themselves from the people, ostensibly to worship Allah, then they wouldn't be thinking about the people. They'd be thinking about themselves. And if they're thinking about themselves, then they're saying, okay, well, me being separated from the people makes it so that people are safe from me, not the other way around. That would be their emphasis, right? So anyways, we left off on this point where he said, know that if a person has facilitated for himself in finding pleasure in the worship of Allah through constant remembrance of Allah, or acquiring the knowledge of Allah through constant contemplation, then dedicating to that is better than all the things associated with mixing with people. So basically, he was having this conversation, if you recall, about is it better to isolate oneself or is it better to mix with people? And you had different arguments on each side, different things that are said on each side, and so on. And then he concluded this section with this point, that if someone in their being alone with Allah can find what it means to really enjoy a relationship with Allah, to really make dhikr and feel it, to really make worship and feel it, to read the Quran and get something out of that reading of the Quran, get this feeling of mu'anasa, that I'm reading this Quran and I'm connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that would be a great benefit. Of course, this is the ultimate goal of worship, right? Ultimate goal of worship is to feel this closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not to feel it, but to have this closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then feeling it would come as a consequence of that. Just like the ultimate goal of the Quran is to act upon the Quran. Right? We learn the Quran so that we can act upon it. I hesitate to say this because it's so easy to misunderstand it, but I'll say it anyways. One of our teachers, he said, in this recent period, a fitna entered upon the ummah. This was the fitna of Quran competitions. It's a very interesting thing that he said. And we're like, what do you mean, Sheikh? He said, because when they made these Quran competitions and everyone started worrying about competing in the competition and reciting in a very beautiful way, and then winning the competition and getting an award and being praised and calling themselves the #1 reciters who won this competition and all of these kind of things. He said this has nothing to do actually with the goal of the Quran. The goal of the Quran is to learn it so that you can act upon it. And instead, it turned into a show. Of course, take it or leave it, or take what benefits from it, right? The point is to remind ourselves that the goal ultimately is to follow Islam. Ultimately, from all of everything that there is in Islam, from the teachings of Islam, the goal ultimately is to follow Islam. It's to follow the way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and to use and following the way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, come to some sort of knowledge of who we are and who Allah is, and our place in existence as people who are submitted to and worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so he says the second benefit then, solitude entails isolating oneself from sins, which often are committed as a result of mixing with people. These sins are 4. Again, it's not to blame the people, but to recognize that there is a consequence to being around people. One of the sins that comes as a result is backbiting. Remember, we also talked about something kind of funny and amusing, which is that people used to isolate themselves, and in isolating themselves, they weren't exposed to sins in the same way, right? Except that it's something that came into their head and maybe they entertained it, but they didn't have external influence when they're in their house, right? And now we have the opposite problem, which is we're usually telling people to get out and deal with people, because then if they get out and deal with people, they end up exposed to less sin than they are actually sitting in their home on their devices and on their computers and stuff like that. It's the opposite scenario, subhanAllah. But nonetheless, what are some of the issues that come up? First, this concerns backbiting, ghiba, because the custom of the people is to rinse their mouths with talking about the honor of other people and to engage in backbiting for fun. Thus, if you mix with people and engage with them in their talks, you are bound to sin and be exposed to the wrath of Allah. If you decided to remain quiet while other people are engaged in backbiting, you will still be their partner in crime, because a person who listens to backbiting is considered to be one of the backbiters. If you admonish them for their backbiting, they will hate you, backbite you in return, and thus accumulate their number of backbiting, let alone the fact that they may also revile you. This is the first issue, is this backbiting, subhanAllah. It's really ajib. One of the amazing things you see in the Muslim community too, very often, is that this is one of those things that quote unquote religious people and non-religious people, they share in it equally. Both of them will backbite equally. Sometimes you see religious people even backbite more. They're always talking about other people. This person this person that, this person this person that. It's a very strange cultural phenomenon in many places. It's a very strange way to live one's life, just talk bad about other people all the time. Some people, they'll do the opposite. They'll talk about other people, but they're talking about good. So-and-so did this, it was really good. So-and-so did this, we learned this from them, we learned that from them. That's a nice thing. But to speak bad about people is a very strange thing. And easiest way to lose your deeds. Actually, one of the things they say about Imam Abu Hanifa, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, they said about him that they would never hear him backbiting other people. And they said, because he's aqal, his intelligence is too strong for him to give away the good deeds that he has done to someone else without any reason. Because this is what happens when you backbite, right? Is that we basically get sin for it, and we end up giving our good deeds to other people. That's why Imam Hassan al-Basri, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, it was said about him that he found that someone was speaking very ill of him, very negatively and ill and all of these kind of things. So he took him a platter of food and gave it to him. It was a gift, basically. The guy was shocked. He said, why did you bring this? He said, because I heard that you were giving me your good deeds, so I wanted to give you something. He's not making fun of him. He's actually being serious. Like, you've done something good for me. You were speaking ill about me, and I benefited from that. Actually, and some of you have probably heard me say this before, is that I think that this is, people who are in positions of like imama, who are in positions of being imams, sheikhs, stuff like this. It's a very dangerous position because is higher responsibility, higher accountability, more likelihood of going to hell. And all of these things are very serious, right? I think one of the things that will help these people is how many people backbite them. Because so many people are backbiting them all the time. It's like their only chance is that they'll get all of these deeds because of all the backbiting that people are doing. SubhanAllah. It's very scary. Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel. So we should be very careful about this. And we should try to remind each other of this. And so he's saying is that you'll be in these gatherings, and probably some of us have experienced this. You'll be in a gathering, people are speaking ill of other people. And if you try to tell them anything, they get mad at you. If you try to say anything, they say worse things. Instead of like saying like, okay, maybe I should slow down a little bit, they'll actually increase. Oh, you think this person's worth defending? Then let me tell you what they really are, and this pull even deeper things out. So you end up not saying anything out of lessening the harm, because if you said something, it'll make it worse. So these are very, very dangerous things. Also, very importantly, is that there's two major things, there's many things, but two major things that come to mind that come as a consequence of backbiting. Number one is that it destroys community. Very clearly, it destroys community. And anyone who's done community work, you see this very clearly. That when people have a habit of talking about each other, it causes a lot of problems. And the second thing that it does is that, I don't know how to say this it's not gender specific, but the term would be gender specific. Yani. It takes away from our rujula, in a sense. Like backbiting takes away from a person's manliness. And manliness is not to be understood as in contrast to womanliness. Manliness is meant to be understood in contrast to childishness. It's the wrong contrast to make it a gender issue. It's not a gender issue, it's a adult issue. And what happens when you backbite all the time is that you have some issue with someone that really, if you have that much of an issue with them, you should be talking to them about it. But instead of talking to them about it, you talk to everyone else, talk to everyone else, talk to everyone else, and then the steam goes out because you talk to everyone else and you don't go talk to them about it. Which is the worst possible scenario, actually. It's very problematic. May Allah protect us. May Allah protect us. Again, how to deal with this it takes a lot of skill. It takes a lot. It's very artful. You see it. Some people can manage these things very tactfully. Allah give us tawfiq. Second, this is related to commanding people to do the good and preventing them from evil. Al-amru bil ma'ruf wa nahy 'anil munkar. Because if a person mixes with people, he cannot but witness evil. Hence, if he does not speak against it, he will be sinful, and if he stands against it, he will be exposed to different types of harm. Indeed, solitude makes a person safe from all of this. That is true too, subhanAllah. It's not necessarily that every single thing that you see that's wrong, you have to comment on it. As we've talked about before, people always quote this hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that man ra'a minkum munkaran falyughayyirhu biyadihi. That someone who sees something wrong, let them change it with their hand, and if not, then let them change it with their tongue, and if not, then let them hate it in their heart. That's the least to be meant. We always say the same thing. There's two conditions on this. Number one is that if you're changing it with your hand, you have jurisdiction to do so. And that's its own conversation, but not everyone has jurisdiction to change something with their hand, right? And the second thing is that the change that you're making can't lead to a bigger harm. But let's put those two on the side right now. The issue is that someone is mixing with people, they see things that should be changed, and they're in a position where they should do something about it. And now they have to, it becomes difficult. And actually, this is, I would say, one of the most challenging issues of public service. Like if you're in an imam position, a sheikh position, something like that, it's very, very hard. Because people bring you their issues. Once they brought you the issue, you can't ignore it now. You have to actually deal with it. You know, if it's something that has to be dealt with, then it has to be dealt with. You don't have chance to look away from it now. And sometimes you're dealing with situations that are not so easy to deal with. You know, people are not stable, people are not reasonable, people don't want to be held accountable, people don't, any number of different things, right? So the consequence of it could be even violent. Could be, you know, it could be actually dangerous to the person. They have to do something about it. It could be that it could be that it has major consequences. Maybe the family is very powerful, maybe the family is very wealthy, so on and so forth. Now you don't have a choice but to do something about it. Maybe it's a board member of your own institution. It's very problematic, very difficult situations to be in. So obviously, if you're not, you know, any imam who's been around for any amount of time, I'm pretty sure if you sat with them and you talk to them, they tell you like, yeah, it would be great to just disappear because then you don't have to deal with these issues. They're very, very challenging. And I've seen like really good people change when these things start coming to them because it really hurts you. It hurts your relationships. It hurts you, how people look at you. People say different things. People do this, people do that. Some things you can never win because a lot of people also, they don't want to know the truth. It's more convenient for them to not know the truth. So they're not happy with you if you tell them the truth, you know. It's very challenging. But this is an issue that he's mentioning here. So solitude makes a person safe from all of this. Okay. Number three, it is associated with ostentatiousness, riyā, a serious illness that is difficult to avoid. The first problem in mixing with people is that a person has to show a desire for meeting the people, which always involves untruthfulness in some way or another. I.e., either the person does not desire to meet them but has to pretend that he is sincere, or he desires to meet them but exaggerates in showing that. The righteous predecessors were careful in responding to questions like, how are you this morning? And how are you this evening? When one of the predecessors was asked, how was your morning? He replied, I woke up this morning while I am weak and sinful, consuming my provision and waiting for my appointed time to die. That's good. Yeah. So, subhanAllah. We talked about this before too, and the way that we ask questions, you have to be careful how you ask a question, because you might pin the person to force them to lie, basically. And Imam Malik used to say that not everyone who is asked can state their reason. It's not always the case that you can say what the situation was. So how are you this evening? How are you this morning? I woke up weak, sinful, consuming my rizq, and waiting to die, waiting for my ajal. You know, subhanAllah, it's all true. I woke up, I didn't have a week, as always. Human beings are weak. As soon as we forget that we're weak, we get reminded very clearly of our limitations if we're paying attention. And then on top of that, sinful. On top of that, whatever rizq Allah gave me, I'm here today. That means I'm using it. And my lifespan, whatever He gave me, I'm using that too. So this is the situation. SubhanAllah. But the third point that he's making is about showing off. So maybe we'll come back to that. Let's see. He continues, he says, know that if a person asks another, how are you this morning? While the inquiry is not made due to one's concern, compassion, and love for him, then the question is considered artificial and is for showing off. Oof, that's where he's going with the angle on it. I was wondering a little bit, like, why is he talking about showing off and then saying these things? But what he's saying is that a lot of the way that we interact with each other, we just do it for show, right? So what do? Okay, when you see someone, you do this and this and this and this, and then you say this and this and this and this, and you check off the box and you move on with your life. But do you actually mean it? And this is a matter of presence of the heart. This is a matter of presence of the heart, you know? So it's very real. Like when you say Assalamu alaikum, you're making dua for the person. When you ask them, how are you? You have to actually feel like, I wonder how they're doing. Even if you're not being that attentive, you have to actually care, like, how are they doing? Oh, it's nice to see you. Is it nice to see you? You have to actually feel that it's nice to see the person. It's doable, by the way. It's totally doable. It just needs to be done. And there's people that I've met that I feel like that in itself, changed my life. That you see the sheikh and anyone who comes in, he says to them, "Assalamu alaikum, how are you?" That's usually the end of the conversation. "Assalamu alaikum, how are you? Alhamdulillah, it's nice to see you." Moves on to the next person, right? But you actually felt like every time he says, "How are you?" and "It's nice to see you," that he actually means it. You know, it's like a real, you feel like he actually meant it. SubhanAllah. Shay Ajib, the heart is Ajib, Ajib, Ajib. Sheikh Mustafa Turkmani, rahimahullah, Imam Zayd always says this. He said that some 1,000 people with no had is a matter of the heart. Like how present is the person's heart with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's essentially what it boils down to. How present is the person with Allah? So a person, 1,000 people with no hal, they won't change anyone. And one person that has a hal, they change 1,000 people. The heart is something ajib, something totally ajib. But Islam, like one of the challenges is that we have a lot of routines in a sense, you know. We have this this etiquette, this thing that we do, this worship that we do. There's a lot of routines in Islam to put you like in the right direction. But what is the actual issue in the end is like, what is the state of my heart with Allah? Is there submission? Is there humility? Is there servanthood? And some of these things, like so many things in life, they're very difficult to understand if you haven't seen them. That's why, as we always say, the Sahaba became the Sahaba because they saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's, can you imagine? Like you automatically get the rank of radiyallahu anhum wa radu an. Allah is pleased with them, and they're pleased with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're the Sahaba. You automatically get the rank. You're with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's obviously something to that, right? Because when you see the Prophet, no matter how many things you've been told, no matter how many things you've read, when you see the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's different, right? And this is the way of Islam, century upon century, as we always say. Century upon century, the way of Islam is not to just read books. Reading books is a folly. It's not a, reading books is good, obviously. Everyone needs books. But we don't take Islam from books. We take Islam from people. They became the Sahaba because they saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The generation after them took from the generation after them, and so on. And all long-standing or even not long-standing Muslim majority places that had any understanding of Islam, you see this from them. You see it in all the stories. Like at least they knew who is the person who we consider them to be a righteous, good person. We can go to them for dua. At least they knew that. Yeah, every community knew this. So there's an understanding then that like there's something there, right? So this issue that he's talking about is that it can't just become all showing off. And this applies to everything in Islam. You know, so much is lost without the understanding of the centrality of mukhalafatun nafs, mukhalafatun hawa. You know, that without an understanding of we have to go against ourselves, without an understanding of we have to go against our desires, so much is lost. Salah is done. By the way, as we always say, you know, just because we mention something doesn't mean that we're talking about someone in particular, you know. But salah is done, worship is done, knowledge is done, hifz is done, all kinds of things are done for nafs. You see this in the community all the time. People like boasting about their child, you know, my child did this, my child did this, my child did this. There's a difference between like talking to someone about something because there's a need for it, and like, you know, there's a flavor. There's a flavor of these type of things. May Allah protect us. Ajib thing that I found with some of my teachers that I spent time with them, not for outward knowledge, but for inward knowledge, so that they never spoke to me about knowledge. Do you understand what I'm saying? So there's sheikhs, different sheikhs do different things. Some of them do everything, whatever, you know. People that I went to specifically not to learn like tafsir, fiqh, sirah, whatever, lugha, all these kind of things. I went to them to figure out how to actually practice Islam. They never spoke to me about knowledge, ever. I'm talking like 10 years have passed, 8 years have passed. No topic of knowledge ever came up. You're a scholar, they know that I studied, they know that I teach, they know that's what I do, everything. Knowledge never came up. Why? Because their goal is to help me to deal with my nafs. The biggest issue of people of knowledge is usually their nafs. They'll say like this is the hardest people to deal with. The people who specialize in these things will say the hardest people to deal with are usually people of knowledge. Because they have like all of this, have all of these issues and all of this knowledge and all of these things. But the human being needs tarbiyah. وَمَّن مَّنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَىٰ. This is what it says, right? Allah says, the one who fears to stand in front of his Lord or her Lord, and they go against their desires, then Jannah is their reward. Their paradise is their reward. فَإِنْ needs mujahada. The showing off issue, it needs mujahada. I mean, I could probably go on for this forever, and we have to be careful the kind of cultures that we make. Unfortunately, I believe that the culture of America in general, the culture of Islam in America in particular, involves a whole lot of showing off. Whole lot of showing off. It's like something when you take a step back, sometimes you look at it, it's just like one big masrahiyya. You're like, this person did this, and like you pat me on, I'll pat you on your back, you pat me on my back, and we make our little agreements and we do our kind of stuff, and like it's just a big masrahiyya. It's like a big theater. Allah protect us. But I'm not blaming only the people who are like the actors in the theater. I blame the audience too. So the audience, all they wanted was a theater, so they got a theater. Yeah, this is Shaykh Khatir Jiddan. Allah protect us. At times, a person may ask this question, but his heart. Uh, at times, a person may ask this question, but his heart is filled with rancor and resentment, which cause him to be interested in hearing that the person is not in a good state. Sometimes I ask, how are you? They want you to be bad. And subhanAllah, misery loves company. To be saved from all of that, solitude is the solution that enables a person to avoid this. This is because if a person mixes with people and does not adopt their manners, they will hate him, find him annoying, backbite him. He will be preoccupied with vengeance, and this will affect him in his worldly and religious affairs. And may Allah protect us. The goal in the end is not to just completely disassociate from society and people and stuff like that, right? But sometimes a break helps us to see things for what they are. And this is true in all kinds of things in life. One of the easy ways to try this is with sugar. Try it with sugar. Try it with coffee. I'm not saying that you have to quit sugar or coffee. I'm just saying you understand, like try it with fast food. Now things have changed, but there was a while where like a lot of people ate a lot of fast food all the time. And then if you take a break from it for a while and you go back and you try to eat it again, you realize how disgusting it is. You're like, wow, I can't believe I was eating this like 2, 3 times a week. This is disgusting. But you have to be detached from it a little bit in order to really like see what the situation is. But Allahu musta'an. I don't want to be too negative. Shouldn't be too negative. We point these things out because they pointed out. But in the end of the day, everything is yasir. You asked about something that's big, and it's easy actually for the one that Allah makes it easy for them. All the challenges we face, actually, they're easy. This is one thing we have to always remind ourselves, is that whatever challenges we face, as a people, as a community, they're easy. It's not that they don't require work, but it's that everything can be solved. And Allah is Kareem. Allah give tawfiq. Fourth, one can be influenced by the negative traits of people, as this is a latent illness which the intelligent people are not aware of, let alone the heedless ones. This is because if a person mixes with an immoral person for some time, even if he internally disapproves of him, he will find that after some time his aversion from evil will have decreased. Because if a person is frequently exposed to evil, he will find it non-repulsive. He will no longer feel the effect and enormity of evil. If a person is always observing others who commit major sins, he will belittle the minor sins that he commits. So let's stop here for a second and just recognize this as a reality. Right? I hesitate to say this because, again, I don't want anyone to feel attacked or something like this. But anyone in Surah Al-Baqarah, you memorize the verse about not marrying disbelief, mushrikeen wal mushrikat. I think it's in Surah Al-Baqarah. Anyway, ولا تنكم لا تنكحوا المشركين ولا يمكن how does it go? Even if you can't remember it. ولا مؤمن ولا مؤمنة تؤمن كيف المشركين حتى يؤمنوا على عبد the end أولئك after this أولئك يدعون إلى النار والله يدعو إلى مغفرة منه وفضل I think so this is a very interesting verse. The verse says, this by the way is the first verse about marriage. The first verse about marriage is non-believing men, and I'm sorry, believing men should not marry disbelieving women, and believing women should not marry disbelieving men. This is the first verse, actually. It's broad, both sides, it applies equally. Okay. I always think about this verse. Look what it says in the end. It says if you marry a believer, it's better both sides. And then in the end it says, those are calling you to the fire, and Allah is calling you to paradise and forgiveness, I think it was. Yeah, and forgiveness. It's very interesting, isn't it? I think about like, okay, so what happens when you're married to someone? Of course, you love them, you have concern for them, you have this, you have that. It's very difficult to be married to someone and believe that their ultimate end in the hereafter is highly questionable, right? It's very difficult to do that. What are you going to start doing instead? You're going to start fudging the lines a little bit, right? You're going to start saying, well, maybe they didn't know, maybe Allah will forgive them, maybe they don't have to believe, maybe this. You're going to start fudging the lines a little bit. It's very, very tricky. So one of the things that he says is when you have people who are very close to you and you spend time with them all the time and they're doing things that are bad, you're going to start to like feel a little bit less serious about that bad. You're going to be like, maybe it's not that big of a deal. Maybe it's okay. You see this actually with people who are getting married all the time because they really want to get married. So they always come and they'll say, well, what about this and what about that? Maybe it's not that big of a deal. And you're like, actually, it's kind of a big deal, you know? But they really want to get married. So the emotions of it kind of like shift to the way that they're looking at it, you know? But again, I don't want this to, don't take this the wrong way. It's not necessarily, the point is to understand that human beings are like this. That's the point. Actually, there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he talks about the character of the people who shepherd camels versus the character of the people who shepherd sheep. You understand? So he says the people who shepherd camels, their character is like and khuyala, they're very like powerful and domineering and stuff like this. And the people who shepherd sheep, they have waqar and tuma'nina. They have like a stability to them, they have a calmness to them. It's just from the animals that they kept company with. Forget the human beings that they kept company with, right? So this is a big, big, big challenge. You know, it's a big, big challenge. Especially when you consider that a lot of times what's good and what's right is not what's easy, right? We know this. Like what's good and what's right is not always the easiest thing. Sometimes the easiest thing is like the thing that's not good. And then you have people around you that are doing things that are not good. So for the average person, let alone like a child or something like that, they're just going to do things that are not good because it's easier, right? Unless they have like some real spirit of jihad. Allah make us all mujahideen. Then he says, similarly, if a person examines the condition of the predecessors in asceticism, zuhd, and worship, ta'abbud, he will look down upon himself and he will have a low opinion of his acts of worship. This will spur him to exert himself in the worship of Allah. These facts show the intent of the person who said, when the righteous people are mentioned, blessings descend. It's an interesting take on it. And the dhikr salihina tanzilun rahmah. Sufyan ibn Uyayna said this, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Said that when the righteous people are mentioned, mercy descends. So what he's saying here is that mercy or blessings descend. So what he's saying is that one of the takes on what that means is that when righteous people are mentioned, it encourages us to do better. So because it encourages us to do better, it's like as if mercy and blessings are descending. Really, if we can manage our own self-hate, and it becomes, especially I noticed with Westerners, becomes an issue. But if we can manage our own self-hate, reading the stories of the righteous people is extremely beneficial. It really like motivates you to do something, and it shows you also some subtleties. I was actually on the way here, I was sharing with my wife, someone had posted this that they said, people always say this thing that when things get tough, you see the true colors of people, you know? I don't know how much I like this statement, actually. I mean, there's a truth to it, but there's also a falsehood to it. Some people, yeah, and it's also usually in our context quite negative, it's like very negative leaning, that their truth came out. Well, no, maybe the truth of their nefs came out, but there was more to them than that. They just lost the battle on that day. They had a bad day and they lost. That's not who they really are. They're actually more than that, right? But then there was a different quote that we came across this morning that was actually shows you like the difference in worldview. Sometimes the difference in worldview is very subtle, but the stories they teach us these things. So it was a statement from Abu Sa'id al-Kharraz, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who's one of the early righteous people. He said, Al-afiyah satarat al-barra wal-fajr. This is his intro to it. So al-afiyah satarat al-barra wal-fajr. Means like the well-being and the protection that Allah gives to humanity, it encompasses everyone actually. The good and the bad. It encompasses the good and the bad. Uh, so he said this, it encompasses the good and the bad. Someone had put a comment, so I'm just reading. And then he said, وَإِذَا جَاءَتْ الْبَلِيَّةِ, and if a trial comes, I just lost it, subhanAllah. فَإِذَا جَاءَتْ الْبَلِيَّةِ يَتَبَيَّنُ عِنْدَهَا الرِّجَالِ. It's a different statement, subhanAllah. It's a beautiful statement. He says, فَإِذَا جَاءَتِ الْبَلِيَّةِ يَتَبَيَّنُ عِنْدَهَا الرِّجَالِ. So he said, everyone the default is they're covered in Allah's mercy. Allah's protecting them and giving them well-being and pardon and all of these things. And then if a hardship comes, you'll see who the real men and women are. It's actually positive in a sense. It's not like as negative looking as positive looking. Like you'll see when something really serious happens, you'll see who are the ones that kind of take on the issue and take on the responsibility and so on. Actually, one brother was telling this to me recently. He was saying that he was in a trip. I can't share any of the details, but he was in a trip and a really bad thing happened on the trip. And it was in a foreign country. And they called the imam, was the first who was with them. They called the imam to deal with the situation. And he gave like really horrible advice. And then they said, okay, well, who else are we going to ask? So they brought this other brother. And as soon as they brought him, he was like immediately on the situation. He was like, we're going to do this and this and this and this. And this is how it's going to get handled. Everyone's on the same page. Okay, yalla, bismillah, do this. And then everything got solved, And it was like a really serious situation. SubhanAllah. So it's not to say, not to focus on the first part that was the bad advice. Let's focus on the second part. See, like, okay, this person now, they're able to handle this situation. May Allah give us tawfiq. Everyone thinks they can handle a situation until they're in one. So Allah al-afiyah, Allah give us afiyah. Everyone thinks they can handle it until, so there was this article that came out after the Egyptian revolution, where the guy wrote this article and he said, one of the things about manliness that I learned about the Egyptian revolution is that you rely on the people who talk less. Not the ones who are always making claims and talking and talking and talking and talking. Because then when like stuff would go down, they weren't even there. So may Allah give us afiyah. Allah give us afiyah. Allah give us afiyah. Okay, among the signs, let's see if we can finish this. I'm going to read this paragraph quickly and then we'll finish, inshallah. Among the things which demonstrate if a thing is constantly encountered and seen, hold on. Among the things which demonstrate if a thing is constantly encountered and seen, that when most people see a Muslim who has not fasted in Ramadan, they will almost regard such a person to be a disbeliever. On the contrary, these Muslims may see a person who prays after the prescribed time, yet they will not be as much repulsed from him as they are repulsed by a person who does not fast at the prescribed time, despite the fact that missing one prayer for no valid reason takes a person out of the fold of Islam. He's Hanbali. Okay, so just to be Ibn Qudamah, they're on Hanabila. This is the Hanabila position, that if someone misses Salat on purpose and without any good reason, not even on purpose actually is kind of, they miss it without some really good reason, they're automatically out of Islam. So what he's trying to say here is that someone misses fasting, it's a huge deal. Everyone's like, oh my God, they're not fasting. Someone misses prayer, they don't bat an eye. They don't think it's a big deal. So there's a discrepancy here. There's no other reason for that notion except that prayer occurs frequently and many people are negligent in it. That's why they think this way. Similarly, if a jurist wears a silk garment or a gold ring, people will disapprove of him severely. However, if they may see him backbiting people, they will not consider that to be a major thing, despite the fact that backbiting is more serious than wearing silk. And it's a very interesting phenomenon. Nevertheless, due to the fact that people hear others backbiting people many times and they see backbiters, the effect of backbiting has disappeared from their hearts. Therefore, it is important that you realize these issues and beware of associating with people, because what you will see in people is what will mostly lead you to be greedy on acquiring worldly things, heedless of the hereafter, disregarding sins, and weakening your desire to engage in acts of worship. Therefore, if you find a gathering where Allah is mentioned, do not leave it, because it is the ghanima of a believer. So if you find a gathering where Allah is mentioned, do not leave it, because that is the spoils, like the spoils of war of a believer. Okay. And then sometimes people like to restrict this to like maybe only a gathering where dhikr is made. They say la ilaha illallah, they sing songs or stuff like that. There's many of the early people, they said actually hilaq al-dhikr, it's hilaq al-fiqh. So like or hilaq al-ilm. The knowledge of the gathering of dhikr is the gathering of knowledge. In the gathering of knowledge, Allah is being mentioned, right? The Prophet ﷺ is being mentioned. Dhikr is being made. This is this is the way. Of course, you study in Egypt, this is the way. Like it's always about ilm, but sometimes a little bit too much maybe, but ilm is very important. Knowledge is very important. And knowledge is a reminder for us. Knowledge helps us to constantly reframe things and reposition things and put things in the right place and adjusting things that need to be adjusted. ونسأل الله التوفيق والعافية وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم الحمد لله رب العالمين. So the third benefit, it's on page 93. We'll continue here, inshallah, after today's last breakfast. Inshallah, next Sunday we meet, no breakfast, only lesson. Inshallah. May Allah accept from us, may Allah help us to reach the month of Ramadan. May Allah give us the tawfiq to worship in the month of Ramadan. Most people always say, make your plans for Ramadan, set things up for Ramadan, so on. It's very good. Most important thing, we ask Allah for tawfiq. Ask Allah to give us tawfiq. Ask Allah to give us tawfiq. You can make the best plan in the world. Without tawfiq, there's no plan. But ask Allah to facilitate for us khair, and to make us pleased with it, and to help us to worship Him alone. All right, any questions or comments? Anyone has? Yes.
When interacting with people, and be very forgiveful, nice, so on. Versus a couple of things in the sense of, let's say somebody wants, let's say forgiveness is better, but at least the way that I think. But if everybody forgives wrongdoing, you may have in society almost okay on each other. So how do you balance that with, I guess, how do you strike a balance that helps the grow?
Yeah, it's a great question, inshallah. You just have to do both with wisdom. That's basically what it comes down to. You know, if someone needs to get nasiha, they need to get nasiha. And if we're, we believe that sometimes something has repeated itself, sometimes this, sometimes that. That being said, a lot of things actually are resolved by just being patient. A lot of things. By just being patient and doing what's right. People who have any level of attentiveness, they fix things with that. Of course, there's many people that you kind of have to tell them. And we have to kind of take it situation by situation, but sometimes things do have to get said. Um, and if there's nasiha to be given, then we should give the nasiha and have good intention and so on. But if we can avoid it, I think it's good to avoid it personally, not out of negligence, out of like sometimes imagine someone is let me give an example. Take a small child, okay? You have small children. They're not really like so why. They're not understanding maybe as clearly as, they're in that stage where you tell them something, they kind of get it, they don't really get it, and so on. And you're walking somewhere, you know, and you want them to walk with you. And they keep kind of like straying. And you can tell them over and over again, like, don't stray, just stay here next to me, stay here next to me, stay here next to me. And you can keep doing that. It's going to get really annoying for everyone. Or you can just kind of like hold their hand and talk to them and look at them and hold their hand and be together. And you'll end up walking to your destination together. And a lot of things are actually handled by this. A lot of things can be handled through good suhbah. But, not everyone has the kind of sabr to do that too. You have to be really sabur. Uh, People do exist. Seen I've seen great mashayikh that I really can't understand the sabr that they have. I can't. I'm like, Shaykh, can we just like say something? I have to like just tell the person this is wrong, but they're not doing it. So you're like, let me see. Like it's not wajib necessarily to say something. So let me see how this is gonna play out. And then you see that like over 6 months, a year, 2 years, like things kind of fix themselves. You're like, subhanAllah, all the relationships were maintained in a very beautiful way because there wasn't like any really harsh intervention, but at the same time, things got fixed. They're like, subhanAllah, you know. But again, sometimes we do need to say something. So uh, I don't know. I don't know what to say to it other than that. A lot of things, there's no easy answer to them. We just have to kind of like do them and try our best and be humble and we learn as we go. Like sometimes we'll probably look at a situation and be like, I should have given nasiha here, but I didn't. And we might look at another situation and be like, I didn't really need to do it here. I should have waited a little bit longer. And only through going through that process are we really gonna figure out like what the limits are. Yeah. Well, yes.
Spoke about like Ramadan coming up and paying for something. What are some things that we can do to like manifest what we like facilitate other transit?
Mm. So as we spoke about tawfiq, what are some of the things we can do to help to get this tawfiq? Um, that's a good question. وَمَا يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا وَيَرْزُقْهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ. Tawfiq in a sense is like Allah gives us something without us really, I mean, we're trying, but it comes from Him. So the verse is saying, whoever has taqwa, Allah will make an opening for them and will give them sustenance from where they don't know. So I think, biggest thing for tawfiq is to try to have taqwa, to have a good niyyah, to have good intention. Allah, we're coming to Ramadan. We should think about Ramadan, think about the blessing of Ramadan, think about the merits of Ramadan, read about them, remind ourselves, try to prepare things as much as we can. Say, Allah, I'm doing this all out of like honoring the month that you have honored, and honoring this time that you have honored, and so on and so on, all out of submission and all out, and to bring this state of heart to the month, and to ask Allah, of course, to make dua, to make sure that any like barriers are taken away. Like if we're wronging other people, if we're treating other people wrong, if we're taking the rights of others, all of these kind of things, we should try to settle them. And because all of these kind of things can be muwani', it can be preventers from the blessings that can come, you know. And to make a lot of tawbah, because it also opens the doors, make a lot of repentance. And inshallah, alhamdulillah, Allah is Kareem. Shahrun Kareem, wa Rabbun Kareem. It's a generous month, and Allah is a generous Lord. It's very easy. Right? It's very easy. Just turn back to Allah. Be sincere. Allah will open the doors of khair. We trust in Him. Alhamdulillah. Yes. Can you say it a little bit louder, please? Yeah. You might not like what I have to say about this. What if we feel like we want to vent about something, you know? Something happens, we want to vent about it, tell our friend or our family or a roommate or something like this happened and this happened and this was a bad day and this and so on. And again, might not like my يعني بس لازم يكون عندنا شوية صلابة يعني. I don't know how to say it. Like we have to, yeah, things happen. Life is really hard. Horrible things happen. And, you know, we don't have to vent about them all the time. If we need to vent to Allah. Which is telling. The Prophet ﷺ vented in a sense, although I'm very hesitant to use these kind of terms and put them on the Prophet ﷺ. But when he felt like he needed to talk about something, he talked to Allah. And if we really need to talk to somebody, which sometimes we do, right? And there are times when we can backbite for the sake of fixing a situation, right? But not just because we wanted to like tell someone about it, but because there's an actual situation that's being dealt with, then we can try to talk to them without making it backbiting. Yeah, we don't have to give away the personalities involved. Say, I'm just really struggling. You know, how are you? I'm really struggling today. Today was really tough. Okay, alhamdulillah. Yeah, I had some situation at work. I felt like this person did me wrong, and it's really eating me up inside. Alhamdulillah, there's no backbiting in that. There's no issue with that. Yeah. But if it's like, can you believe, you know, this thing happened with so and so again? Every day it happens with them. They're like this and this and this and this, and then it's a problem. And by the way, we're not going to feel better by sinning. However you look at it, right? Sinning is not going to make our state better. If we can figure out some way to do it without doing that, it would be really good, inshallah. But talk to Allah. The dua of Ta'if. Talk to Allah. The dua of Ta'if is key to everything. You know, key to everything. It's a beautiful, beautiful dua. Yeah. Okay, now we have more hands went up. I'm gonna give you short answers. Don't get mad at me. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Write it out to purge it,
Mm-hmm.
just toss out.
What is you write it out to get it out of you? You write it out and then throw away the piece of paper. Yeah, that's a nice idea. Just keep that paper safe. Burn it instead of throwing it out. Yeah, or use code names or something. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. Tarbiyah is not easy. لازم نربي أنفسنا. We have to discipline ourselves. It's not easy. Yeah.
I have a question, like, is there really backbiting if you don't mention the name of the person?
Well, if you don't give away the identity, it's not bad.
Yeah, if you mention the next one is this. I think if you keep out the names, it's not really back pointing.
Yeah, yeah, it can be, but I mean, it cannot be. But the problem is if we know the people well, they know us well, they start to put two and two together, sometimes things come, you know. The other thing is that also, even when we vent, we want to vent with some level of humility and some level of productivity. So oftentimes when we vent, we don't acknowledge the possibility of what we played in the situation. Like, did I actually understand what they said correctly? Did the situation, there's a lot of like questions we can ask about ourselves, you know. Sometimes things are just bad. Allah help us. Allah protect us. Alhamdulillah. Life has a lot of things. Swallow them. Yes, Samson.
Like, for someone to for that, but also warning others of like potential harm that can befall them, but also like staying true to what the law says about even black men, but also preventing harm from befall, unnecessary harm from befalling other people.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, if you have reason to believe that harm can come from something and you tell someone about that to warn them from that harm, that has nothing to do with husn al-dhan. Doesn't have anything to do with thinking well of someone. Okay, so this person X, let's say, for example, and we're pretty confident that person X is a danger to person B. And you go to person B and you tell them, be careful with X. They're, you know, I have reason to tell you this, please be careful with X. Doesn't mean I don't think well of X. Actually, I still think well of X. And I don't like judge them necessarily for the problem that they have. I still want them to change. I still want them to be better. I still want them to go to paradise. I still want them to make Tawbah. I still, everything. All of them, all of the good opinion is still there. But there's still reason to believe that there's harm. So we do that. And we have to be very careful with these things, you know. The Prophet ﷺ did not teach us to be naive in the approach of being thinking well of others, wanting good for others. Doesn't mean that we have to be naive. We should be smart, we should be cautious, we should be careful who we trust, how we trust them, at what level we trust them. These are all things that we have to learn in life that can be to get them wrong is quite dangerous actually. So may Allah protect us. Yes. Amen. Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
So like, how do you manage that? Like, what can make the better movement?
Yeah, it's a good question. So you're listening to someone sinning by backbiting someone else. But if you say something, it might get worse. So how do you handle the situation? Basically, ad-darar yuzal. The harm is to be removed. And if someone is forced to choose between two harmful things, they choose the less harmful thing. And that less harmful thing is not what they're supposed to do. That's that simple. Yeah, I'm dealing with it. I don't want to hear this. It's really bad. And I'm very confident based on experience and relationship and knowledge and all of these things that if I was to try to change it, it's going to be worse. Okay, I'm not going to try to change it. But maybe there's a way that I can kind of steer the conversation, certain things that I can do to make, I'll try to make things better, however I can make them better. And I'll try to not make them worse. But I don't get so caught up in the particular thing that I end up making things worse. I think a lot of religious people do this. They get very caught up in certain things and then they make things worse because they lose sight of the bigger picture. Out of like people's concern, out of their hips, and protect us. I feel like this room is, someone's supposed to use this room or something. Maybe we should, anything else before we close? Yes, last one, inshallah.
Not related to etiquette, I guess. Recent plane crashes. Someone posed the question, do these people who died in these crashes die as shaheed?
Recent plane crashes, do the people who die count as shaheed? Or if they're Muslim? Inshallah. Inshallah, they're shuhada. They died like a sudden death. Allahu a'lam. I would need to review it, but أتمنى لهم الشهادة. May Allah accept them as shuhada. Inshallah. And it's also a reminder that we should travel fi sabilillah. whatever travel that we're doing, we should travel for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even if it's something ostensibly like touristy things can still be for the sake of Allah. Just to make a good intention. I wanted to see this place because it's very beautiful. It reminds me of the majesty of Allah. I wanted to do this thing because it would make my family happy. I wanted to visit my relatives. So alhamdulillah, all of it is fi sabilillah. If we die fi sabilillah, then it's also a way to get shahada. May Allah give all of us the death of shuhada. Allahumma mitna موت الشهداء يا رب. Okay, barakallahu fikum. Inshallah, we'll see you in Ramadan. Inshallah, Ya Rab. Allah allow us to reach the month of Ramadan. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma inna nas'aluka al-huda wa tuqa wa al-afafa wal ghina. Allahumma bi sidrika al-jamil. Allahumma bi sidrika al-jamil. Allahumma inna nas'aluka al-'afwa wal 'afiya wal mu'afata ad-da'ima fi ad-din wa dunya wal akhirah. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب ربنا آتنا من لدنك رحمة وهيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا نصر من الله وفتح قريب وبشر المؤمنين اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه اللهم ارزقنا حسن الخاتمة وارزقنا حسن الخاتمة اللهم أعنا على ذكرك وشكرك وحسن عبادتك يا عالم السر منا لا تهدك الستر عنا وعافنا واعف عنا وكن لنا حيث كنا انقذ قلوبنا لا نبهنا من الغفلة عنك وجعل آخر كلامنا لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله عدد كمال الله وكما يليق بكماله سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين بارك الله فيكم